Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. It was back in the summer of 1998, in a small town called Milford, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. I remember it vividly because I was a teenager then, working part-time at the local diner just a block away from the 24-hour laundromat on Elm Street. That place was a relic. A dingy, fluorescent-lit spot called Suds and Spin, with rows of ancient washers and dryers that hummed like tired old beasts through the night. It was the kind of joint where folks from all walks of life crossed paths. Night shift workers, insomniacs, and the occasional drifter. But what happened there that August night turned it into the stuff of local legend, at least for a while. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, though everyone around town just called her Ellie. She was in her mid-30s, a quiet librarian at the county branch, with a reputation for being bookish and a bit reclusive. Divorced a few years earlier, no kids, lived alone in a modest bungalow on the outskirts. From what I pieced together later, from gossip at the diner and the police reports that made the rounds, Ellie had pulled up to the laundromat around 11:15 p.m. in her faded blue Honda Civic. The security cameras, grainy black and white things installed just a year prior after a string of petty thefts, captured her clearly. She stepped out of the car carrying an oversized wicker basket overflowing with laundry, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing a simple sundress and sandals. She looked tired, like she'd had a long day, but nothing out of the ordinary. Inside, the place was empty except for the attendant, an older guy named Frank who dozed behind the counter most nights. Ellie nodded to him, loaded her clothes into one of the front-loading washers, whites and colors mixed haphazardly as if she wasn't too fussy about it, and fed a handful of quarters into the slot. The machine whirred to life, sloshing water against the glass door. She then settled into a plastic chair in the corner, the one under the flickering light by the vending machines, and pulled out a paperback novel from her purse. It was a mystery thriller, ironically enough. Something by Mary Higgins Clark, I think. The camera showed her flipping pages slowly, occasionally glancing up at the washer's timer. That was the last clear footage of her. About 20 minutes in, the tape from the main camera glitched. Just a brief static burst, maybe 30 seconds long, right around the time the exit door would have been in frame. When the image cleared, Ellie was gone. Her book lay open on the chair, spine up, as if she'd set it down mid-sentence. The washer kept churning away, untouched. Frank later swore he hadn't seen or heard a thing. He'd been half asleep, listening to a late-night radio show. No one else entered or left during that window. Her car sat parked outside, keys still in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat with her wallet and ID inside. It was like she'd evaporated into thin air. The town buzzed with speculation for weeks. The police were called in by morning when a regular customer found the abandoned load and reported it. They reviewed the tapes, dusted for prints, interviewed everyone who might have known Ellie. Rumors flew. Alien abduction, a secret lover whisking her away, even whispers of foul play tied to her ex-husband, who lived 2 towns over and had a temper. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Mystery at the Laundromat. Woman vanishes without a trace." Search parties combed the woods behind the building, divers checked the nearby creek, but nothing turned up. Her family, a sister from out of state, came down, pleading for leads on the evening news. It felt like one of those unsolved cases that would haunt the town forever, the kind that gets retold around campfires to spook the kids. But here's where it gets grounded, away from all the sensationalism. It took about 3 months, but the police eventually pieced it together through old-fashioned detective work. Turns out the camera glitch wasn't some supernatural anomaly. It was a faulty VCR tape, worn out from constant reuse, that skipped during playback. A forensics tech from the state lab re-examined the original recording and found faint, distorted frames that had been overlooked. Ellie had gotten up quietly, left her book, and slipped out the back emergency exit, which wasn't covered by the cameras at the time. The owner cheaped out on full coverage. Why? Ellie had been struggling with severe depression, something her sister later confirmed. She'd been seeing a therapist sporadically, but hadn't told many people. That night, overwhelmed by a recent layoff notice from the library due to budget cuts, she'd had a breakdown. Instead of finishing her laundry, she wandered off on foot, walking aimlessly along the back roads for hours until she hitched a ride with a trucker heading south. She ended up in a small city in Pennsylvania, checked into a motel under a fake name, and spent weeks drifting, trying to start over without telling anyone. It wasn't a grand escape plan, just an impulsive decision born out of despair. The breakthrough came when a diner waitress in that Pennsylvania town recognized Ellie's photo from a missing persons flyer that had circulated online. Early internet days, but it helped. Police tracked her down to a waitressing job she'd taken under the table. She was safe, if a bit disheveled, and agreed to return home after some counseling. No charges were filed. It was ruled a voluntary disappearance. Ellie moved in with her sister for a while, got back on her feet with medication and therapy, and eventually returned to Milford, though she switched to a different job at a bookstore. The laundromat installed better cameras after that, and Frank retired not long after, claiming the whole ordeal aged him a decade. Looking back, it wasn't a ghost story or a conspiracy. It was just a sad, human moment amplified by bad timing and technology. Ellie passed away peacefully in 2015 from natural causes. But every now and then, when I drive by that old laundromat, it's a coffee shop now, I think about how close we came to turning her pain into an eternal mystery. Life's weird enough without the extra embellishments. Back in 2015, I owned a little laundromat called Sudsy's Cleaners on the edge of town, tucked between a strip mall and a gas station in a quiet suburb of redacted for privacy. It wasn't much. Just a dozen washers, 8 dryers, a couple of vending machines for detergent and snacks, and those uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor. I'd been running the place for about 15 years by then. Inherited it from my uncle after he retired to Florida. It was a steady business, mostly locals, families with kids, college students from the nearby community college, and the occasional trucker passing through. Nothing exciting ever happened until that summer. It started with the complaints. Around mid-July, customers began mentioning a weird smell coming from one of the dryers, the big industrial one in the back corner, model number 7. At first, I brushed it off as maybe someone had left wet clothes in there too long, or perhaps a forgotten load of gym socks had gone moldy. You know how laundromats can get. People are careless. But the complaints kept coming. "Smells like rotten meat," one lady said. wrinkling her nose. Another guy, a regular named Mike who did his laundry every Tuesday, joked that it was like something died in there. I laughed it off, but I checked the machine myself. Sure enough, there was a faint, sour odor, metallic almost, seeping out from the edges of the door. The dryer had been marked out of order for a couple of weeks already because the lock mechanism was jammed. I'd called a repair guy, but he was backed up with jobs. By early August, the smell had gotten worse, and business was starting to drop off. People were avoiding that whole side of the room. I finally decided to force the thing open myself. I grabbed a crowbar from my truck, wedged it into the door seal, and pried it with all my strength. The lock gave way with a loud snap, and the door swung open. What I saw inside made my stomach turn. There were dark, rusty stains smeared all over the drum. Blood, no doubt about it, dried and flaked in places. Mixed in were shreds of fabric, bits of what looked like a blue t-shirt, some denim scraps, and something that might have been underwear, all torn and tangled up. It wasn't a full load, just remnants. Like whatever had been in there had been churned to pieces. The smell hit me full force then, putrid, like old blood and decay. I backed away, gagging, and called the police right then and there. The cops arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers and a detective from the local precinct. They cordoned off the area, took photos, and collected samples. I watched as they swabbed the stains and bagged the fabric pieces. They asked me all sorts of questions. When I'd last seen the dryer working, who my regulars were, if I'd noticed anyone suspicious. I told them everything I knew. The machine had jammed about 3 weeks earlier, right after a busy weekend. No one had reported anything odd at the time, and the security camera, an old one that only covered the front door, didn't show much beyond people coming and going. The lab results came back a few days later. The stains were indeed human blood, type O positive, with traces of adrenaline suggesting stress or injury. The fabric shreds were from common clothing brands, nothing traceable. They ran the DNA through the local and state databases. No matches to any missing persons, criminals, or victims in the area. It was baffling. How did blood and torn clothes end up locked in a dryer without anyone noticing? Theories floated around town. Maybe a fight had broken out, and someone stuffed evidence in there. Or perhaps a homeless person had crawled inside for warmth and had some kind of accident. The local paper ran a small story about it, calling it the mystery of the bloody dryer. And for a while, people stopped coming altogether. I had to close for a week while the police investigated, and even after, business was slow. Rumors spread. Ghost stories, urban legends about serial killers using laundromats to dispose of evidence. It creeped me out, I'll admit. I started locking up early and installed better cameras. The case dragged on for months without leads. The police interviewed dozens of regulars, checked hospital records for unexplained injuries, even looked into nearby accidents. Nothing. By fall, it seemed like it would go unsolved. Just another weird footnote in local history. I was ready to scrap the dryer and move on, maybe sell the place. But then, in November, we got a break. A woman named Sarah Jenkins walked into the police station. She was a nurse from a town about 30 miles away, and she'd seen the story online when it popped up in a weird news roundup. Sarah confessed that the blood was hers, or at least from an incident involving her. Back in July, she'd been in a minor car accident on the highway nearby. A deer jumped out. She swerved, clipped a guardrail, and cut her arm badly on shattered glass. Panicking and bleeding heavily, she pulled off at the nearest exit, which led right to my laundromat. It was late at night. The place was empty. She didn't want to go to the ER because she was uninsured at the time and scared of the bills. Instead, she grabbed some rags from her trunk, old clothes she kept for emergencies, wrapped her arm, and tried to clean up in the bathroom sink. But the bleeding wouldn't stop, and her clothes were soaked. In a daze, she stripped off the bloody items, stuffed them into the dryer to dry them out, while she bandaged herself and started the cycle. But the machine jammed mid-spin, maybe from the uneven load or the blood gumming up the works. She tried to open it but couldn't, and with her arm throbbing, she just left, figuring she'd come back the next day. But she ended up driving home, passing out, and waking up to find the cut needed stitches anyway. She went to a clinic under a fake name to avoid records, got treated, and forgot about the laundromat in the chaos. Months later, seeing the news, she realized what had happened and came forward. The police verified her story. DNA match confirmed. Hospital records from the clinic lined up with the timeline. And even the deer accident report from Highway Patrol matched. No crime, just a scared woman making bad decisions in a panic. The shreds. The dryer had overheated and torn the wet, bloody fabrics during the partial cycle. The smell was from the blood baking in the heat over weeks. I was relieved more than anything. No murder, no mystery, just human error and bad luck. The laundromat picked up again after the resolution hit the papers, and I even got a little tourist bump from curiosity seekers. But I replaced that dryer anyway, and added more lights outside. Eventually, though, with the economy shifting, I sold the place in 2018 and retired. Looking back, it was the strangest chapter of my life. But at least it ended with answers, not shadows. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in October 2002 in the small town of Elmwood, Illinois, a place where the cornfields stretched out like an endless golden sea, and the local laundromat on Main Street served as a hub for the community's mundane routines. The wash and fold was one of those unremarkable spots. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, rows of coin-operated machines humming away, and the faint scent of detergent mingling with the earthy smell of damp clothes. Owned by a retired couple, the Hargroves, it was open from dawn till dusk, 7 days a week, catering to farmers, factory workers, and families who didn't have washers at home. That day started like any other. Mrs. Hargrove was behind the counter, folding a customer's load while chatting with a regular about the upcoming harvest festival. A handful of people came and went. Old Mr. Jenkins with his basket of work shirts, a young mother juggling twins and a pile of diapers, and a trucker passing through who needed to freshen up his jeans. The security cameras, a basic setup installed just a year earlier after a minor vandalism incident, whirred quietly in the corners, capturing the comings and goings on grainy VHS tapes that the Hargroves reviewed only if something went amiss. Around 2 p.m., during a brief lull when the place was empty except for Mrs. Hargrove, she stepped into the back room to refill the vending machine with soap packets. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. When she returned, there it was, a blue plastic laundry basket sitting on the folding table in the center of the room, right under the window that let in the afternoon sun. At first, she thought someone had left their clean load unattended. Happened all the time. But as she approached, a soft, muffled cry stopped her in her tracks. Peeling back the top layer of faded bath towels, she found a newborn baby, no more than a day or two old, swaddled snugly in a soft white blanket. The infant's tiny face was pink and scrunched, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving weakly. There was no note, no diaper bag, no clues, just the baby, clean and seemingly healthy, with a tuft of dark hair and a birthmark like a small strawberry on its left cheek. Mrs. Hargrove's heart raced as she scooped the child up, wrapping it in her arms while dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The police arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the quiet town. Paramedics checked the baby over. It was a girl, slightly underweight but otherwise fine, with no signs of injury or neglect. She was dehydrated but responded well to a bottle at the hospital. Word spread like wildfire through Elmwood. Neighbors gathered outside the laundromat, murmuring in hushed tones as officers dusted for prints and interviewed anyone who'd been in the vicinity. The Hargroves pulled the security tapes immediately, eager to help. But when they played them back, there was nothing. The footage showed the usual activity up until 1:55 p.m., then a seamless jump to 2:05 p.m., with the basket suddenly there on the table. No glitch, no static, just a perfect skip, as if those 10 minutes had been erased. Technicians later confirmed the system was functioning normally before and after. The tapes weren't tampered with, at least not in any way they could detect. The investigation dug deep. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, checking for anyone who'd recently given birth or shown signs of distress. They reviewed hospital records from nearby Peoria and Springfield, looking for unreported deliveries or missing infants. Tips poured in. A suspicious car parked down the street. A young woman seen walking hurriedly with a basket earlier that day. But nothing panned out. The towels were generic. The basket a common brand sold at the local Walmart. DNA testing on the baby yielded no matches in national databases at the time. Technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. And without suspects, there were limits to what could be done. Locals, of course, had their theories. Elmwood was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone's business, and the incident sparked endless speculation at the diner and church suppers. Some whispered that the parents must have been from out of town, perhaps transients passing through on Route 78. Others pointed to the camera blind spots. The system only covered the entrances and machines, not the folding area by the window. Whoever left the baby had to know that, they said. Maybe a former employee or someone who'd cased the place. There were darker rumors, too. A desperate teenager hiding a pregnancy or a family in crisis avoiding child protective services. But no one claimed supernatural forces or ghostly interventions. It was just a sad, human mystery in a world full of them. The baby girl, temporarily named Laundry Doe by the nurses, spent a few weeks in foster care while authorities worked through the bureaucracy. She thrived, gaining weight and cooing at her caregivers. Eventually, with no leads on her biological parents, she was cleared for adoption. A local couple, the Millers, who'd been on a waiting list for years after struggling with infertility, stepped forward. They renamed her Emily, and she grew up in Elmwood, oblivious to her origins until her teens, when her adoptive parents shared the story gently, emphasizing how loved and wanted she was. Years later, in 2015, a breakthrough came quietly. Advances in genetic genealogy, spurred by consumer DNA kits, led to a match. Emily, now a curious high schooler, submitted a sample with her parents' blessing. It traced back to a distant cousin in Ohio who helped connect the dots. The biological mother turned out to be a woman named Sarah, who'd been 19 at the time, living in a nearby town. She'd given birth alone in a motel, overwhelmed by an abusive home and no support system. Panicked and ashamed, she'd chosen the laundromat because it was public, warm, and she knew from prior visits that the blind spot existed. She'd worked there briefly as a teen. Sarah had left town shortly after, starting over in another state. But the guilt never fully faded. Authorities didn't press charges. The statute of limitations had passed, and Sarah expressed deep remorse, explaining she'd monitored news reports to ensure the baby was safe. Emily and Sarah met tentatively, exchanging letters first, then in person. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There were tears, questions, and boundaries, but it brought closure. Emily forgave her, understanding the desperation that led to that day. Sarah, now a mother of 2 more children, found peace in knowing her first daughter had a good life. Today, the wash and fold is still there, under new ownership, with updated digital cameras covering every inch. Emily Miller, now in her 20s, visits our Elmwood often, working as a social worker helping at-risk families. The story lives on in local lore, not as a haunting tale, but as a reminder of human frailty, second chances, and the quiet ways communities heal. When I was about 12 years old, back in the early 2000s, my family lived in a modest apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. We didn't have a washer or dryer at home, so laundry day meant lugging baskets down the block to the local laundromat, a dingy place called Suds and Spin that smelled like a mix of detergent and stale coffee. My mom was always busy with her 2 jobs, so she often sent me there with my older cousin, Maria, who was 16 at the time and lived a few doors down. Maria was like a big sister to me, tough, street smart, and always looking out for the younger kids in the family. That particular Saturday afternoon in late summer, the sun was beating down, and the air was thick with humidity. We loaded up our baskets with a week's worth of clothes, towels, and bed sheets and trudged over, chatting about school starting soon and what we wanted to do with the rest of our weekend. The laundromat was pretty empty when we arrived. Just a couple of regulars folding clothes at the long tables and an old vending machine humming in the corner. We stuffed our loads into 2 washers, fed them quarters, and settled in for the wait. Maria pulled out a magazine from her bag, flipping through celebrity gossip, while I fiddled with a handheld game I'd borrowed from a friend, something simple like Tetris on a knockoff Game Boy. Time dragged on, the machines rumbling and sloshing away. About halfway through the cycle, the door jingled open, and a man walked in. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, average build with short brown hair, wearing faded jeans, a plain t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. Nothing about him screamed danger at first. He carried a small duffel bag that I assumed had laundry in it, and he smiled politely as he glanced around. He loaded a machine near ours, then struck up a casual conversation. "Hot day out there, huh?" he said, nodding toward the window where the parking lot shimmered under the heat. Maria gave a non-committal, "Yeah," without looking up from her magazine. But I was more open. Kids that age often are. I replied something like, "Totally. I wish we had a pool or something." He chuckled and kept talking, asking innocent questions. What grade was I in? Did I like sports? He mentioned he had a nephew around my age who loved video games. It felt like small talk, the kind you'd have with any stranger in a boring place. Maria shot me a glance now and then, but she didn't seem too bothered yet. After a bit, as our washers buzzed to a stop and we started transferring clothes to the dryers, he shifted the conversation. "Hey, kid," he said to me directly. "You like animals? I've got this adorable puppy in my van out back. Just picked him up from a friend. Fluffy little guy, black and white spots. Want to come see him real quick? He's probably getting hot in there." My eyes lit up at the mention of a puppy. I was obsessed with dogs back then, always begging my mom for one, but we couldn't afford it in our tiny apartment. I started to say, "Sure," but before the word was even out, Maria's hand clamped down on my arm like a vice. Her face had gone serious, eyes narrowed. "No, we're good," she said firmly, already pulling me toward the door. "Our stuff's almost done anyway. We're leaving." The man's demeanor changed in an instant. His friendly smile twisted into something insistent, almost desperate. "Oh, come on. It's just right outside. Won't take but a minute. The kid wants to see it. Right, buddy?" He took a step closer, blocking our path slightly, his voice rising a notch. Mariah didn't hesitate. She yanked me harder, shoving past him with our half-empty baskets. "I said we're leaving," she repeated louder this time. We burst out the door into the bright sunlight, hearts pounding. But he followed us a few steps onto the sidewalk, calling after us. "Hey, wait, it's no big deal." His tone had an edge now, like he was annoyed we'd ruined his plan. Just then, another customer, a burly guy in his 50s who'd been inside reading a newspaper, stepped out behind him. "Everything okay here?" he asked, eyeing the man suspiciously. That seemed to snap the stranger back. He muttered something under his breath, turned on his heel, and headed toward a white van parked at the far end of the lot. The intervening customer watched him go, then turned to us. "You girls all right? That didn't look right." Mariah nodded quickly, thanked him, and we didn't wait around. We grabbed our baskets and ran the 2 blocks home, laundry sloshing and spilling a bit along the way. My legs felt like jelly, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, but he didn't follow further. We burst into the apartment, out of breath, and spilled the whole story to my mom, who was in the kitchen making dinner. She dropped everything, her face paling as we described the guy and the puppy lure. She hugged us tight, praising Maria for her quick thinking, and immediately called the police non-emergency line to report it. They took a statement over the phone and said they'd send a patrol car to check the laundromat. Later that evening, Mom talked to a few neighbors while out on the stoop, and that's when we learned more. Apparently, a man matching that description had been spotted hanging around the neighborhood for weeks, lingering in parks, chatting up kids at the corner store, always with some excuse like lost directions or offering candy. One neighbor even said she'd seen his van before with out-of-state plates. The police followed up a couple of days later, interviewing us at home. They confirmed similar reports from other areas and said they were increasing patrols. As far as we know, the guy must have gotten spooked because he vanished from the neighborhood after that incident. No more sightings. Mom started driving us to a different laundromat farther away, and she enrolled me in a self-defense class at the community center. Maria and I grew even closer from it. She became my unofficial bodyguard for a while. Looking back as an adult, I realize how close a call it was, but I'm grateful for the quick actions that kept it from turning into something worse. It taught me early on to trust my instincts and those of the people who care about me. One night, a few years back, I found myself at the local laundromat around 10 p.m., folding a massive load of clothes that had piled up over the week. It was one of those dimly lit places in a strip mall, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the constant hum of washers and dryers in the background. I was tired from a long day at work, just wanting to get through my chores and head home to crash. There weren't many people around, just an older couple sorting their socks and a guy in his mid-30s maybe, wearing a faded hoodie and jeans, who was loading his machine across the aisle from me. At first, he seemed like any other patron. He glanced over and made a casual comment about how the dryers always seemed to eat quarters, chuckling a bit. I smiled politely and nodded, saying something like, "Yeah, it's a ripoff every time." We exchanged a few more bits of small talk, him asking if the machines were reliable here, me mentioning I'd been coming for a couple of months since my apartment's washer broke. It felt harmless, the kind of idle chatter that passes the time in a place like that. But then things shifted. He started steering the conversation into more personal territory. "So, do you live nearby?" he asked. Folding a shirt with exaggerated care, I kept it vague, saying something about being in the neighborhood. He didn't let up, though. "Must be nice having your own place. You live alone or with roommates?" I felt a twinge of unease, but brushed it off as maybe just awkward social skills. I mumbled that I had my own spot and tried to focus back on my laundry pile. He persisted, leaning against his machine now, arms crossed. "Boyfriend ever help you with this stuff? Or is he the type who lets you handle it all?" That one hit me like a warning bell. Too probing, too familiar for a stranger in a laundromat. I could feel my stomach tighten. Why did he need to know if I had a boyfriend? I forced a laugh to keep things light and said, "Nah, I handle my own chores just fine." Then quickly stuffed the last of my clothes into my basket. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I was done talking. Grabbing my keys from my pocket, I gave a quick, "Have a good night," and headed for the door, my heart beating a little faster than usual. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty under the sodium lights, casting long shadows. I loaded my basket into the back seat of my car, slid into the driver's side, and locked the doors right away. Something my mom had drilled into me since I was a kid. As I pulled out onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights flick on behind me. It was his car, the same beat-up sedan I'd noticed parked a few spots away. He eased out right after me, matching my turn onto the street. Coincidence? Maybe, I told myself, but my grip on the wheel tightened. I took a left at the next light, heading toward home, but he followed. Then another turn, and there he was again, staying a couple of car lengths back, but definitely tailing me. My mind raced. Had I said something to encourage this? No, this was creepy. Panic set in. I wasn't about to lead him straight to my apartment. I remembered that there was a police station about 5 minutes away in the opposite direction from home. Without signaling, I made a quick right at the next intersection, watching to see if he'd follow. Sure enough, his light swung around the corner behind me. Adrenaline pumping, I sped up a bit, weaving through quieter streets to reach the station. My phone was in my bag on the passenger seat, but I didn't dare reach for it while driving. Finally, the station came into view. A squat brick building with squad cars parked out front and bright floodlights illuminating the lot. I signaled and pulled in sharply, parking right under the main entrance sign. In the mirror, I saw his car slow down at the edge of the lot, hesitate for a second, then accelerate away into the night, tires squealing faintly as he sped off. I sat there for a minute, engine still running, catching my breath and scanning the road to make sure he was gone. Shaking but relieved, I went inside and explained what happened to the officer at the desk. She was sympathetic, took down a description of the guy and his car, and suggested I file a report just in case. They even had someone escort me out and follow me partway home to ensure I got there safely. Nothing ever came of it. No follow-up incidents, no sightings of him again. But it shook me enough to change my habits. I started doing laundry during busier daytime hours, always parked closer to the door, and even signed up for a self-defense class at the community center. Looking back, I'm glad I trusted my gut. It could have been nothing, but better safe than sorry in a world full of unknowns. I remember that night vividly. It was about 2 years ago, during one of those hectic weeks where my schedule was packed with work shifts and errands. I was living in a small apartment in the suburbs of Chicago at the time, and my building's laundry room had been out of order for days due to some plumbing issue. The only option left was the 24-hour laundromat a few blocks away, tucked between a gas station and a strip mall that shut down early. I figured midnight would be the perfect time to go. The place was usually empty then, and I could knock out my load of clothes without interruptions. I loaded up my basket with a week's worth of jeans, shirts, and towels, grabbed a book to pass the time, and headed over in my old Honda Civic. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was dimly lit by a couple of flickering fluorescent lights, and only one other car was there. An older sedan with tinted windows that I didn't pay much attention to. Inside the laundromat, the air smelled like a mix of detergent and stale coffee from the vending machine in the corner. The rows of washers and dryers hummed softly, and the fluorescent bulbs overhead cast a harsh white glow that made everything feel a bit surreal. I chose a washer in the middle row, loaded my clothes, poured in the soap, and started the cycle. That's when I first noticed him. He was sitting on one of the plastic chairs bolted to the wall in the far corner, near the folding tables. No laundry basket, no detergent, nothing. Just him, slouched back with his hands in the pockets of a worn gray hoodie. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with unkempt stubble and tired eyes that seemed sunken under the brim of a baseball cap. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe he was waiting for a ride or just killing time. People end up in laundromats for all sorts of reasons late at night. I sat down a few machines away, cracked open my book, a thriller, ironically, and tried to focus. But every few minutes, I'd glance up, and there he was, staring right at me. Not subtly either. His gaze was direct, unblinking, like he was studying me. I'd look away quickly, pretending to check my phone or watch the washers spin. But when I'd peek back, his eyes hadn't moved. It started to unsettle me. The laundromat was quiet, except for the rhythmic sloshing of the machines and the occasional beep from the timer. No one else came in. It was just us. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was zoned out, lost in thought, or dealing with his own issues. But as the minutes ticked by, the staring didn't stop. It felt deliberate, invasive. After about 20 minutes, my washer finished, and I moved my clothes to the dryer. That's when he shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him stand up slowly, stretch his arms like he'd been sitting too long, and then walk across the room. My heart rate picked up. He didn't head for the door or the vending machine. Instead, he came right toward me. I kept my head down, focusing on stuffing the damp clothes into the dryer, but he stopped just inches away, leaning casually against the machine next to mine. He didn't say a word. No hello, no excuse, nothing. Just stood there, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of cigarette smoke on his clothes. His presence felt heavy, like he was waiting for something, but I had no idea what. I froze for a second, my mind racing. Was he going to ask for money? Say something creepy, or worse? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my empty basket, left the dryer running with my stuff still tumbling inside. It was only half dry, but I didn't care. And headed straight for the door. My keys were already in my hand, and I pushed through the glass exit without looking back. The cool night air hit me as I hurried to my car, fumbling a bit with the lock before sliding in and starting the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing outside now, under the orange glow of the streetlight, hands still in his pockets, watching my taillights fade down the road. I drove home with the doors locked, checking my mirrors the whole way, my pulse still pounding. When I got back to my apartment, I double-checked the locks and even pushed a chair against the door for good measure. The next morning, I called the laundromat's owner. Turns out they had security cameras, but the footage was grainy and didn't show much beyond what I'd experienced. The guy never touched anything or caused damage, so there wasn't much to report to the police. But I filed a description anyway, just in case. I went back a few days later during daylight hours to retrieve my dried clothes, which were still there, untouched. After that, I started doing laundry at a friend's place or during busier times. Looking back, it was probably just some lonely or troubled person with poor social boundaries. But it taught me to trust my instincts and not take chances late at night. I haven't seen him since, and I'm grateful it ended there. Nothing more than a weird, unsettling memory. Back in my sophomore year of college, in the fall of 2012, I was living in a run-down, off-campus apartment in a sketchy part of town. Think narrow streets lined with old brick buildings, flickering streetlights, and that constant hum of traffic from the nearby highway. The neighborhood wasn't exactly known for its safety, but rent was cheap, and it was close enough to campus that I could walk to classes. That's where this whole thing with the folding stranger unfolded. A story that started as campus gossip and turned into something that stuck with me for years. It all centered around this 24-hour laundromat called Suds and Spin, tucked between a pawn shop and a dingy pizza joint, about 2 blocks from my place. I used to go there late at night to avoid the crowds, throw in my load, study from a textbook while the machines hummed, and grab a slice next door if I got hungry. It was one of those places where everyone minded their own business. Students like me, night shift workers, and the occasional homeless person seeking shelter from the cold. The owner, an older guy named Mr. Patel, kept it clean but didn't bother with security cameras back then. Said it was too expensive. One chilly October evening, around 10 p.m., a few regulars noticed this guy come in. He was in his mid-40s, I'd guess, average build, wearing a faded gray hoodie, jeans, and scuffed sneakers. Nothing flashy about him. He could have blended into any crowd. But what caught people's attention was that he didn't have any laundry of his own. No bag, no basket, no detergent or quarters jingling in his pockets. He just wandered over to the folding tables where people left their clean clothes to sort later. Witnesses, mostly pieced together from police reports and word of mouth later, said he started folding strangers' laundry. Neatly, methodically. Shirts creased just so, pants aligned by the seams, socks paired up like he was prepping for a military inspection. He didn't say a word to anyone, didn't make eye contact. A couple of college kids whose stuff he was handling thought it was weird, but harmless at first. "Hey man, that's my load," one of them reportedly said, but he just nodded vaguely and kept going, as if he was in a trance or something. No aggression, no theft. He wasn't pocketing anything, just folding. This went on for about 20 minutes. Mr. Patel noticed from behind the counter but didn't intervene. He figured the guy was eccentric, or maybe waiting for his own cycle to finish. But then, around 10:30, the stranger's demeanor shifted. He glanced at the door repeatedly, his hands trembling a bit as he smoothed out a final towel. One witness, a nurse coming off her shift, said he looked paranoid, like he was expecting someone to burst in. He muttered something under his breath. Nobody caught the words. Then abruptly left the half-folded pile and bolted out the door, leaving the laundromat's bell jingling behind him. An hour later, just before midnight, a jogger found his body in the alley behind the pizza place, 2 blocks away. Stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen, wallet still in his pocket with cash untouched, no signs of robbery. The police canvassed the area, talked to everyone at Suds and Spin that night. But no one knew him. His name turned out to be Robert Klein, a 46-year-old accountant from a suburb about 30 miles away. No criminal record, no known enemies. His car was parked a few streets over, keys still in it, with a half-empty coffee cup in the holder like he'd just stepped out for a quick errand. The story blew up on campus the next day. People speculated wildly. Was he a stalker, mentally ill, part of some drug deal gone wrong? The laundromat angle added this eerie layer. Why fold strangers' clothes? It felt like a ritual or a distraction. Rumors spread that someone had been following him into the laundromat, maybe watching from the shadows outside. A few people swore they saw a shadowy figure near the windows that night, but nothing concrete. The police investigated for weeks, but leads dried up. No fingerprints on the folding tables matched anyone suspicious. No surveillance footage from nearby businesses caught the killer. It became one of those local unsolved mysteries, the kind that gets a blurb in the paper and then fades. Years later, after I graduated and moved away, I kept tabs on it out of curiosity. In 2018, the case finally cracked open. Not through some dramatic breakthrough, but quiet police work. Turns out Robert Klein had been dealing with a messy divorce. His ex-wife's new boyfriend, a guy with a history of violence and jealousy issues, had been harassing him for months. Threatening calls, slashed tires, the works. Klein had filed a restraining order, but it didn't stick because of lack of evidence. That night, he'd driven into the city to meet a private investigator at a nearby coffee shop, hoping to gather proof for court. But he got spooked en route, ditched his car, and ducked into the laundromat to blend in and wait it out, thinking it was a public spot where he wouldn't stand out. The folding? It was a nervous tic, something his sister later confirmed. He'd always folded laundry to calm his anxiety, a habit from childhood. Unfortunately, the boyfriend tracked him down, waited outside, and followed him into the alley when he left. A tip from an old acquaintance finally led police to the guy, who confessed after DNA from a discarded cigarette butt matched the scene. He got 25 years for second-degree murder, claiming it was a heat-of-the-moment confrontation that escalated. Looking back, it wasn't some supernatural horror or random act of madness, just a tragic mix of personal demons, bad decisions, and a system that didn't protect someone in time. The laundromat's still there, I hear, with cameras now. But every time I pass a similar place late at night, I think of Klein and wonder how many quiet desperations play out in everyday spots like that. You know, I still think about that weird incident at the laundromat from a few years back. It happened right here in our town, and it freaked everyone out for a while until the police pieced it all together. I'll tell you the whole thing as I remember it, step by step, because it's one of those stories that sounds like a ghost tale at first, but ends up being sadly ordinary once you get the facts. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in late fall, the kind where the streets are slick and everyone's in a hurry to get home. This laundromat, Suds and Spin, is on the edge of town, tucked between a strip mall and a gas station. It's open 24/7, but that night it was pretty empty. Just a couple of regulars folding clothes and the attendant dozing behind the counter. Around 8:15 p.m., the security cameras inside picked up this guy walking in. He was in his mid-50s, average build, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and nothing on his feet. Barefoot, which was odd enough on a cold, wet night like that. He had a plastic grocery bag dangling from one hand, the kind you get from the supermarket, and he looked a bit disheveled, like he'd had a long day. The footage showed him shuffling straight to one of the dryers in the back row. These big industrial ones that can handle bulky loads. He opened the door, reached into the bag, and pulled out a pair of worn brown work boots. They were muddy and soaked, probably from the rain outside. He tossed them into the dryer, fed in some quarters, and started the cycle. Then he just stood there for a minute, staring at the machine tumbling away, before turning around and walking toward the front door. But here's where it got confusing at first. The cameras didn't catch him actually leaving. There was a blind spot near the entrance, where the vending machines blocked the view, and the attendant swore he didn't notice the guy go out. Everyone assumed he'd slipped away, unnoticed, maybe while the attendant was in the bathroom or something. Hours ticked by, nothing unusual inside the laundromat. The dryers hummed. A few more customers came and went. Around midnight, the attendant did his rounds and noticed those boots still spinning in the dryer. The cycle had ended, but no one had claimed them. He pulled them out, figuring someone forgot, and set them neatly on the floor next to the machine, lined up like they were waiting for their owner. He even checked the parking lot quick, but it was dark and empty except for a couple of cars, including this old sedan that had been there since evening. Didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until about 2 a.m. that things escalated. A patrol car was doing its nightly loop through the area. Our town's small, so cops keep an eye on places like that after hours. The officer noticed the sedan still parked crookedly in the lot, engine off, lights out. He shone his flashlight inside and saw the guy slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. No response when he knocked. They forced the door open, checked for a pulse. Nothing. The man was dead, cold to the touch, like he'd been gone for at least a couple of hours. No blood, no wounds, no signs of a fight or forced entry. His wallet identified him as Robert Harlan, a local mechanic who lived alone on the outskirts. The car was his, registered in his name. Word spread fast the next morning. Small town gossip, you know. People were whispering about how his shoes were inside the laundromat, all dry and tidy, but he'd somehow ended up back in his car without anyone seeing him leave. The cameras confirmed he entered barefoot with that bag, but no exit footage. Folks started spinning wild theories. Was it a ghost? Some kind of teleportation prank? Or worse, foul play where someone dragged him out a back way? The laundromat didn't have external cameras, just the indoor ones, so that fueled the mystery. And the initial autopsy came back inconclusive. No obvious trauma, no drugs or alcohol in his system. Heart seemed fine at first glance. Undetermined cause, they said, which just made everyone more uneasy. But here's where it all settled into something real and tragic, not supernatural. The police dug deeper. Turns out Robert had a history of health issues he'd kept quiet about. High blood pressure, untreated sleep apnea, and he'd been complaining to his doctor about dizzy spells for weeks. His neighbors said he'd been acting off lately, forgetting things, like leaving his tools out in the rain. That explained the wet boots. He'd probably stepped in a puddle or worked outside earlier, got them soaked, and decided to dry them at the laundromat on his way home. As for the no exit footage, it was simpler than anyone thought. The investigators reviewed the tapes frame by frame and noticed a glitch in the system. A cheap setup with overlapping angles that sometimes lagged. But more importantly, the attendant admitted he'd stepped out back for a smoke around 8:20 p.m., leaving the side door propped open for a minute. That door led straight to the parking lot, and it wasn't covered by cameras at all. Robert must have wandered out that way, maybe disoriented from one of those dizzy spells, intending to wait in his car until the boots were done. He never made it back inside. The final autopsy report, after more tests, pinned it on a massive stroke. A cerebral aneurysm that burst without warning. It hit him while he was sitting in the car, engine off, probably staring at the laundromat lights. No struggle because it was quick. He just slumped over, and that was it. The plastic bag? Found crumpled under the passenger seat, empty. He'd forgotten about the boots in his haze, or maybe the stroke came on too fast. In the end, it was just a sad case of bad luck and poor health catching up to a lonely guy. No ghosts, no killers, just life being unpredictable. The laundromat owner upgraded the cameras after that, and the town moved on. But every time I drive by there, I think of those shoes sitting there, waiting for someone who never came back. Makes you appreciate checking in on folks, you know? I remember that night at the laundromat like it was yesterday, even though it's been a few years now. I was working the evening shift at Suds and Spin, this dingy little place tucked into a strip mall on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly folding forgotten loads, restocking detergent pods, and dealing with the occasional jammed machine. But it paid the bills while I was figuring out my next move after community college. Part of my routine involved checking and cleaning the single unisex bathroom at the back, which was basically a glorified closet with a toilet, sink, and one of those ancient hand dryers that sounded like a jet engine. It was around 8 p.m. and the place was winding down. Only a handful of customers were left. An elderly lady reading a paperback while her delicates tumbled, a college kid cramming for exams with his earbuds in, and a mom with 2 little ones who were more interested in spinning on the swivel chairs than helping fold socks. That's when the mom approached me at the counter, her kids trailing behind her like ducklings. She leaned in and said, kind of hushed, "Hey, just so you know, someone's been in the bathroom for a really long time, like over half an hour. I knocked once, but no answer. Thought you should check it out." I nodded, trying to play it cool, but my mind immediately jumped to the usual suspects. Maybe someone got sick from bad takeout, or worse, an overdose. We'd had issues before with folks using the place as a pit stop for all sorts of things, given the neighborhood's rough edges. I grabbed my keys and the cleaning caddy, just in case, and headed back. The door was locked, of course. I rapped on it firmly 3 times. "Hello? Everything okay in there? This is the attendant." Silence at first, then some shuffling sounds, like someone scrambling to gather stuff. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a minute, the door creaked open. Out stepped this guy, mid-30s maybe, with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they'd seen better days. Faded jeans, a hoodie with holes at the elbows. He wasn't carrying any laundry baskets or bags, just a beat-up backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes were glassy, bloodshot, and he avoided looking at me directly, muttering something like, "Sorry, man," as he brushed past and headed straight for the exit. He moved fast, like he didn't want any questions, and the door's bell jingled as he vanished into the night. I watched him go for a second, then stepped into the bathroom to assess the damage. The smell hit me first. Not the usual public restroom funk, but something sharper, like unwashed clothes mixed with a faint metallic tang. I flipped on the light properly and just stood there, taking it in. It wasn't a mess in the chaotic sense. It was more organized, like he'd turned the tiny space into a makeshift home. A pair of socks, gray woolen ones with holes in the toes, were draped over the hand dryer, still slightly damp as if he'd washed them in the sink and was letting the hot air do the rest. On the edge of the sink sat a bent spoon, charred at the bottom, next to a cheap plastic lighter, the kind you get at gas stations. No needles or obvious drugs, thank God, but it didn't take a detective to piece it together. Tucked into the corner behind the door was what looked like a bedroll. An old sleeping bag, rolled up tight but not quite hidden, with a crumpled fast food wrapper peeking out from inside. There were a few other signs too. A half-empty water bottle on the floor, some crumpled tissues, and even a dog-eared paperback novel wedged between the toilet and the wall, like he'd been killing time reading. It hit me then. This guy hadn't just been using the bathroom for a quick fix. He'd been camping out in there, probably for hours, maybe even slipping in during a busy afternoon when no one noticed. How long? I couldn't say, but long enough to settle in without raising alarms until that mom needed the facilities for her kids. I didn't panic or anything. I'd seen enough in that job to know life throws curveballs at people. I just sighed, pulled on some gloves from the caddy, and started cleaning up. Bagged the spoon and lighter as trash. Didn't want to leave that lying around. Tossed the socks into the lost and found bin, though I doubted anyone would claim them. And hauled the bedroll out to the dumpster behind the building. It felt heavy, like it carried someone's whole story in it. I wiped down the surfaces with disinfectant, mopped the floor, and aired the place out as best I could with the tiny window cracked open. By the time I finished, the mom and her kids were gone, and the place was empty except for the hum of the machines. I locked up at closing time, flipped the sign to closed, and headed home. Thinking about that guy the whole drive. Wondered where he ended up that night. Maybe a shelter or just another spot to hunker down. The next day, I mentioned it to my manager. and we started checking the bathroom more frequently during shifts. Nothing like that happened again while I was there, but it stuck with me as a reminder of how invisible some people's struggles can be, right under our noses in the most ordinary places. I quit a few months later for a better gig, but I still drive by that laundromat sometimes, hoping things have improved for everyone who passes through.